Behind the rain, the beginning of winter. Winter in Madrid wasn't particularly harsh, but there was something about the way the rain lashed against the windows of Laura's apartment that made her skin crawl. Sitting on the windowsill, a cup of coffee in her hands, she stared at the overcast sky, oblivious to the drops. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were empty, as if her soul had escaped through an invisible crack she didn't even know existed. It was her third winter with Marcos, her husband. 3 years of marriage, 5 of a relationship. A story that had begun with books, laughter, and strolls through the Retiro, and now seemed to fade into prolonged silences and office excuses that arrived later and later. Laura was a freelance photographer. She worked from home, editing portraits and fashion shoots for digital magazines. Sometimes she went out to capture urban scenes that she later sold as conceptual art. Her life was quiet, perhaps too quiet. Meanwhile, Marcos, a telecommunications engineer, worked long hours at a company that always seemed to have an urgent meeting just when she wanted to talk about their plans or her desire to have a child. "It's not the right time," he'd say, and she'd pretend to understand. That afternoon, however, something changed. She was checking her email when she saw a message with the subject, "Flower delivery confirmed." The strange thing was that she hadn't ordered flowers. She opened the email, thinking it might be a mistake, but the recipient was clear. Delivery for Camila Ruiz, Office Calle Serrano 48, 5th floor. Sender, Marcos Ortega. Laura felt something squeeze her chest. She reread it. And again. And again. There was no doubt. Camila. Camila was the new assistant director at Marcos's company. He had mentioned her a couple of times, casually, always as a very capable girl, young but intelligent. Nothing more, but the flowers told a different story. They were orchids. White. Laura's favorites. These weren't flowers you sent to someone just out of courtesy. Night fell with a thick silence. Marcos arrived past 10, his coat wet and a tired smile on his face. "Did you eat already?" he asked as he took off his shoes at the entrance. Laura watched him silently from the kitchen. He seemed like a stranger to her. "Yes," she replied dryly. "Everything okay?" "Of course. And you? How was your day?" Marcos shrugged. "Long, endless meetings. I'm dead." She nodded. She said nothing else. Not a word about the email. Not a word about Camila. That night, Marcos slept soundly. Laura didn't. The next day, Laura went to Marcos's office. She didn't go in. She stayed across the street, camera in hand, watching. At 9:23, Camila arrived. Tall, slender, raven hair, and a charming smile. She greeted the doorman with familiarity, like someone who was already part of the place. She wore a belted beige coat, and in her hands, she carried a box of white orchids. Laura felt a knot in her stomach. She took a picture. She didn't know why she was doing it, but she needed proof. Not for others, for herself. To make sure she wasn't imagining things. She waited another hour. At 10:35, she saw Marcos leave through a side entrance of the building. He was with Camila. They walked together. They were laughing. Very close. Too close. They stopped in front of a coffee shop. They went in. From the street, Laura watched them sit by the window. He touched her hand. She didn't pull away. Laura left before seeing the kiss. When she returned home, she burst into tears. It wasn't a noisy, hysterical cry. It was silent, as if each tear was a piece of her trust falling apart. She had options. She could confront Marcos. She could ignore it. She could seek revenge. But she chose something else, to write him a letter. Laura's letter to Marcos, fragment. "I don't know when you stopped looking at me like before. I don't know when love became a routine that no longer excited you. Maybe it was my fault, for clinging to a future you no longer wanted. I don't blame you for falling in love with someone else. The heart doesn't always obey. But I do blame you for lying to me every night, for kissing me knowing that it wasn't me you desired anymore. I deserved the truth. I deserved respect. But you chose silence and betrayal, and that's something I cannot forgive." Decisions that hurt Laura didn't confront Marcos immediately. She waited. She observed. She gathered the courage to understand what she wanted to do with her life, with her broken heart and her dignity in tatters. Over the next few days, the routine continued. Marcos left early, came back late, and Laura no longer asked him questions. She decided to focus on herself. She returned to outdoor photo shoots, reconnected with old colleagues, and reopened her online gallery with new content. Each photo was an attempt to capture what she felt: loneliness, emptiness, resistance. One afternoon, while editing portraits on her laptop, her friend Clara called her. "Do you have a minute? I saw something that I think you should know." Laura felt a chill. Clara was a mutual friend of both, but closer to her. She told her that she had seen Marcos at a bar last Friday with Camila. They weren't hiding. They didn't look like coworkers. They kissed. They held hands. They acted like a couple. Laura didn't cry this time. She just said, "Thank you." She hung up, and instead of confronting him, she went on a trip. She booked a flight to Lisbon. Just 3 days. She needed clarity and distance. In Lisbon, she met Alex, a young American chef who had been living there for 2 years. They met in a small family restaurant where he cooked. They talked about food, art, travel. They laughed a lot. And even though Laura wasn't looking for anything, one night she ended up kissing him. It was a short, intense, unexpected kiss. It wasn't love. It was an escape. The next day, she returned to Madrid with a new letter in her backpack. The confrontation, the day Laura confronted Marcos, there were no shouts. There was no drama. Just a long, painful truth exposed like an open wound. She handed him the letter. He read it in silence. Every word was a mirror. Every phrase a slap. When he finished, he just said, "I'm sorry." "Since when?" Laura asked. Marcos lowered his gaze. "For a few months. It was confusing, not planned." "Do you love her?" "I don't know." Laura nodded. It was worse than a yes. "Did you want to stay with me while you figured out if you loved her?" "I didn't want to hurt you." She laughed without joy. "You did anyway." Marcos tried to approach her, but Laura stepped back. "I don't need you to explain anything else." "I'm leaving." "Where to?" "I don't know, but away from you." That night, she packed only what was necessary. She left the apartment without looking back. She didn't cry until she was in the taxi. And upon arriving at the new small studio she had rented on the other side of the city, she wrote a message to Alex. "Thanks for the kiss. It reminded me I'm still alive." He replied, "If you ever come back to Lisbon, come have dinner with me." She smiled for the first time in weeks. Rebirth amidst ruins. The following months were a reconstruction. Laura started therapy. She started painting again, something she hadn't done since college. Her photos began to gain emotional strength. They were exhibited in a small, independent art gallery. Her work, full of sadness and beauty, caught attention. One morning, she received an email. It was an invitation to exhibit in Paris, an emerging art festival. Her name was starting to be recognized. Marcos tried to contact her several times. Long messages, calls, a letter. He told her he missed her. That Camila wasn't what he thought. That he had made a mistake. But Laura was no longer the same. She didn't reply. One day, while walking in Parque del Oeste, she received a video call from Alex. He was in Madrid for a few days to attend a gastronomic event. "Would you like to have dinner with me?" he asked. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. The dinner was natural, fun, without pressure. They talked like old friends, but there was something more. A quiet spark. Mutual admiration. This time, the kiss was longer. And it wasn't an escape. Decisions from the heart. Alex stayed in Madrid for 2 weeks. They walked around the city, ate at markets, and shared childhood secrets. Laura felt seen, valued. Without judgment, "Would you stay here?" she asked him one night. "If you give me a reason, yes," he replied. She didn't answer. But the next day, she took him to her studio and showed him her new project, a series of portraits of women who had survived abandonment, deception, heartbreak. Each one was a mirror of her soul. Alex said nothing. He just hugged her. The day he left, Laura cried. But this time not out of loss, but out of fullness. A week later, he sent her a letter. "I fell in love with you amidst coffees, photographs, and wounds. If you ask me to, I'll come back." Laura, for the first time, allowed herself to love without fear. She replied, "Come back. This time, I'm ready." Love after pain, Alex returned. Not with empty promises, but with actions. He officially moved to Madrid. Together, they opened a small cafe gallery in Malasaña. He cooked. She exhibited art. Laura never saw Marcos again. She heard from acquaintances that he had gone to work in another city. Camila left him a few months later. And while it still hurt to remember, it no longer wounded her. Because Laura understood something important. Self-love is stronger than any betrayal. And that sometimes, behind the darkest rain, there's always a second chance to love. The end.